Hi, and welcome to the 100 Rural Women podcast. I'm your host, Teresa Kittridge, founder and CEO of 100 Rural Women, a nonprofit and nonpartisan organization dedicated to creating connections and inspiring leadership. We see a future where more women are in positions of leadership, and we are set out to interview 100 amazing women doing the important work in rural. Today I'm joined by Alexa Schaefer, one of our team members.
Hi, I'm Alexa, and what Teresa said, we are so excited to interview 100 amazing women doing important work in rural. This is something that the organization has been working towards for the past couple of years, and now we're just shifting it to a podcast format. I've been a part of a lot of different areas here at 100 Rural Women and kind of found myself working in those different areas, doing different programming. I started off as a social media intern and then moving into developing out our social programming, managing teams, doing some tech work, honestly a little bit of everything, and that's startup work for you.
Yeah, and that's been the beauty of having young women like Alexa work with us. So Alexa's been with us since the very beginning almost, and has really had an opportunity to work across our entire portfolio and help us build each sector of our organization. So that's where I feel we're really fortunate, is to be able to have not only that advantage of as an organization, but to be able to mentor and work with young women and get mentored back.
Yeah, and I have been so happy to experience that and be able to meet so many amazing women through this. And I think podcasting really is going to be a great format for more people to be able to be involved as the world has changed. Like, the things that used to work are honestly just like shifting and changing for busy women. And I'm excited because I used to do our spotlight profiles when they were posted as articles on the website, and I have always wanted to interview Teresa, but she wanted to keep the focus more on all of these amazing women. But I am so excited to finally get people to get to know you a little bit better. So Teresa will be your host every week, but today we're switching positions a little bit, and I actually get to sit down and interview her, so you all get to know the amazing woman that's on the hosting side. So Teresa, just diving in a little bit, when I started working for you, I was 20 years old. I kind of had a little idea of what I wanted to do. I had interest in different things. I thought maybe nonprofit work. I thought women empowerment was cool, but I really didn't have direction. And I just want to know, where were you sitting at 20 years old, and what did your career path look like from there on out?
Well, that's interesting to think back on. Yeah, at 20 years old, I was at the University of Minnesota trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life, and it really I did an internship just like you, Alexa, trying to figure out what I wanted to do, and ended up interning for an amazing legislator that really was all about public policy and figuring out how do you all work together with diverse views to bring it together. And I did that internship at the legislature in 1978, of all things, and then I was there for 20 years.
Wow.
So it's pretty amazing how that can feed into a career, not one I intended at all.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's sort of how I ended up launching into my public service part of my career.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit more about what it looks like to work in the legislature?
Yeah, I was really fortunate. I look back and I think, oh my gosh, 20 years is such a long time. But I think the beauty, particularly of the House of Representatives, is every 2 years there's an election. So there's constant change. What I loved about working at the legislature was there's so many different personalities, so many different people, so many people there serving for a variety of different reasons. And that's what I really loved. I loved the debate. I loved the difference in ideas, and I came to realize that, that's what it's all about. Is bringing together a lot of different ideas to figure out how we can, make good policy. And I always felt very fortunate at the legislature that for the majority of the years I worked there, I worked in nonpartisan roles. So I have my own politics. I have my own issues, a lot of them. But the beauty was in that work, I was able to learn and meet so many people from different walks of life, and people who are really committed to doing good for people. I always gravitated, probably because I'm a rural kid. I grew up in a rural area, the southwestern part of the state. I always gravitated to the rural members, just because it was sort of what you see is what you get, and people, in the days that I was there, people really worked for their districts. That's what it was all about. So it might not be politics. Of course, you have a political vote once in a while, but it was really about how do I best serve my constituents. So I love that part of it. I love that positive part of public policy.
Right. And so what kind of positions did you kind of find yourself working through as you advanced from, you started as an intern, then where did it go from there, and how did you even work your way up?
Right. So I was an intern, and then next job I had was I was a page. So the way you get a page job is if you know somebody or you apply. I knew somebody who said, hey, I could help you, I could help you with that. So a friend of my father's actually did some lobbying at the Capitol, and that's how I got my first job at the state Capitol as a page. So a page is just sort of, you're what we call them gophers. You go get this, go get that. The staff committees do different projects for members. So that is where you work for all members. So that was really a good training. There's some elected officer roles in the House of Representatives at the state level. And they range from, it sounds sort of wild when I think about it, postmaster, chief clerk, assistant chief clerk. And so what happened with me was I was a page, and there was an opening to be the assistant postmaster. And so I actually applied for that and ended up getting that job. And that was really, truly delivering mail in the building and sorting mail, plus doing a variety of other tasks. Pages and the postmaster are in the sergeant at arms office, and so I worked there for a number of years. I was postmaster, and then I always say, not funny but true, the postmaster died, and so I ended up getting the postmaster's job after he passed away, and so then I was postmaster, and that was an elected office. So what that means is every 2 years when the legislature convenes, all the members in the legislature elect the officers for 2 years. So the postmaster is an elected position, so is the assistant postmaster. So I was elected by all members to be the postmaster. And then my next role was the high school page and college internship program leadership. So I was elected an assistant sergeant at arms in charge of education programs for the House of Representatives. So that was wonderful. I got to work with interns like I had been, so that was amazing. And then to run the high school page program, where we bring in students from across the state throughout the session a week at a time. So you might be, you're from Woodbury, you might be with some people from Roseau or Waseca. So we'd bring in a disparate group of students, and they would learn about the process. They'd get to work in the chamber and do similar jobs to pages. So that was an incredible job. I loved it. I got to work, of course, across the state, and I got to go to college campuses and recruit interns, and then I got to work with interns when they came to the Capitol. So I have a long history with interns. I'm a fan. I benefited greatly. My internship was so empowering, and I'm going to jump back a little bit. A typical internship at the Capitol in those days was answering constituent letters and making calls and maybe doing a project. And the member I worked for, John Brandel, who was a professor at the university, an economics professor, he had me read legislation, and then we talk about it. Then he'd have me go get authors to sign. So I got to do super cool things as an intern. And John actually ended up being dean of the Humphrey Institute also. So I ended up with this incredible internship. So I really tried to do that with the interns and the high school pages. It was really to empower them and empower their learning and get them to do, to think about what they wanted to do and figure out programming. I did education every week of who could help them sort of envision the future and bring in, at the time I ran the high school page program. Governor Rudy Perpich met with the students every week. So did Arnie Carlson, who was a state auditor at the time. I'd line up members to come in and talk to them. I'd have different people from different walks of life come in and talk to the students so they could see all these different career trajectories and all these different ways of not only public service, but different careers that could, really help them think through what they want to do in the future and get some ideas.
Right. And so when you had started, did you see yourself going into all of this further, or you just thought, it's an internship, or, is this something that you kind of just felt like you fell into everything?
Yeah, I grew up in a very public service oriented family, very engaged in the community. So as a young person, I was, there were policy discussions around our table, political discussions around our table. My grandmother was a huge civic organizer and very involved politically. And going to her house in Columbia Heights was like a history lesson and civic engagement. So I grew up with that background. My grandfather on my mother's side was a judge. We had a lot of attorneys and judges on one side of the family, and the other side was law enforcement. So I grew up with a big public sector background. And so it was sort of a natural, it wasn't what I intended to end up working at the legislature, but it was a natural move for me. My brother was a runner for a law firm in Mankato where I grew up. And, I used to drive one of the attorneys up to St. Paul quite a bit when Patrick couldn't, and he was a legislator. So I've always sort of had that connection. And, when I think back to my career at the legislature, after the education programs, after I finished that work, then I became an assistant chief clerk, which is a super cool job where when you think about the House chamber, you have the speaker in the top rostrum, and then those people below the speaker, those are the clerks. And so I was that was the majority of my career at the legislature, and that was working across with strategies, rules and procedure, and working with all members and staff. So it was sort of a natural fit for me to sort of ebb and flow through the work I had done, and then to be able to work in the chamber and really be able to be part of the core of the system of the legislature was an amazing experience, and to really have a better sense of why the process was so important and why rules were so important, and what what are the strategies to make good law. It was an amazing experience. But so I did have that public service side, and I always had that law and policy in different ways coming through on my family. It definitely wasn't what I thought I would do in my career, but it definitely, when I look back, was a natural flow for me.
Yeah. Did you ever see yourself getting into the more partisan side?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I've always been active politically, personally, so I've done a lot of work on campaigns. I've done campaign management. I've done all those things outside of work. I always thought I was super lucky to be able to have a job where I didn't have to worry about politics, and it was all about process policy and how to do good things for citizens, and to be able, away from work, to be able to focus on my personal interests and my personal issues. That is really hard sometimes, particularly today. I was just really lucky that when I worked throughout my career, that there were so many opportunities to work together and work across party lines. So being able to be in roles that were more nonpartisan, that was very freeing, but definitely away from work. I was super involved in my issues and what I thought I could do to make the world a better place.
Yeah. Well, you really opened my eyes to working in public service, and it's never something I would have considered, and maybe even now I don't think that it's necessarily the right path for me, but being able to hear from so many women that are working in the legislature and just the importance of really showing up and how you actually can speak to them. Like, they always just seem like such untouchable people when you aren't familiar with that. And it's just been really cool that the organization has brought even just that level of education, even if you're not interested in pursuing that type of role yourself.
Yeah, and I think I did grow up in a really engaged family, and so I did have some insight there, but I learn every day, and I think the thing that we always need to remember with our elected officials, for example, is they're just people. They're just our neighbors. Mm-hmm. They're just like us. And I think that's a big piece of the work that we try to do at 100 Real Women, too, is sort of demystifying some of that, because we're all just people. We're here trying to figure out how to work together and for the greater good. So that's always what sort of keeps me going. It's that there are people out there that want to work together and put their their opinions aside, or their political opinions aside, to figure out how we can work better together. That's sort of the whole piece that I loved about the legislature, is more of a deliberative and collaborative body.
Right.
That's always been the intriguing piece for me.
Very cool. And then eventually you actually ended up leaving that area of work.
I did.
And I think a really cool thing about you is that you've had multiple careers in very different spaces. So right. I would just love to go into some of the other things that you ended up doing afterwards.
Yeah, absolutely. And they say education pushes you out, and it does. I ended up about 18 years in at the Capitol. I was like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do with my life? I got to do something else. And I loved what I did, but I decided I had the opportunity to go back to grad school. So mid-career, I went back and I got a master's in organizational leadership at the University of St. Catherine now. Used to be the College of St. Catherine. And that is really I always called it sort of a liberal arts MBA, because it's all based in ethics and leadership. But you had all your business courses plus organizational leadership courses. So that was an amazing experience for me. I was able to do it because St. Kate's really caters, and still does, but really catered to the adult learner. So for people who are going back and were working full time, it was psychotic. I had a 2-year-old. I was working at this job where I had no control of my hours, but the beauty of St. Kate's was you would meet every other weekend. It was very cohort focused. We met as a cohort, and I was able to juggle it until the last semester when session was just overwhelming. I had to put it off. So I made it through in about 2.5 years with my master's, and that really pushed me to think, gosh, there's other things I could do with my life. There's other things I could do with my career. And I then, as you mentioned, I've had a variety of careers. I tease that, and it's probably true, though. I think I got yelled at one too many times at the end of session. And I'd been getting recruited by a technology company, a friend of mine that had worked at the legislature and had really taken the legislature into technology, our technology era of laptops and wireless, which was big stuff then. He left and kept recruiting me. A couple of his college friends had started this technology company, and I was like, he's like, you should come. And I'm like, I'm not leaving. And I tell you what, after session that year, I thought, I'm going to go meet these entrepreneurs. I'm curious. And they were all about what I learned in school. Yeah.
Session's got to be brutal in that way.
Flat, it is. And I was really interested in, the legislature is very hierarchical. And what I loved about this startup company was it was flat. It was a flat organization. And it was all about empowering others and team building. And I ended up leaving the legislature for a startup. People thought I was crackers, of course, and how could I do that? And it was a wild experience, and the company grew exponentially. I think I was the 11th person hired, and in 6 months we had 90 people. We were a Disney partner. We were growing like crazy.
Wow.
Probably the biggest frustration for me was they brought me in to build. So it was a technology company. They brought me in to build community. And so, but what would happen with the owner is and CEO is I would build, and then he wouldn't let me implement. He'd move me to another part of the company to build, which drove me absolutely crazy. But it pushed me out of my box and made me realize, oh, yeah, I don't have to have the idea, build the plan, and implement everything. But that was really jarring for me to not have a project from beginning to end. So I got moved around a lot. A great experience. Good news, bad news was... Bad news was our business model wasn't working. We had a big investor that wanted to give them more money, but they wanted control of the board. And these young guys were like, yeah, no, we're not doing that. And I was the oldest person in the company, by the way, too, when I went there. So we all had packages and went our merry way. And I took a summer off and just floated on the lake with my daughter and her friends, trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life. It was the first time I hadn't worked since I was a young teenager. So I was at a career crossroads and thinking, oh my God, I left a 20-year career for this year startup. And now what am I going to do? So it was an interesting time, but I think that school really helped me realize that there was a lot of things that I had skills and there were things I could do, and I had transferable skills. So that was a pretty cool experience, and a little scary because I just didn't know what I was going to do. And so I think my family was getting a little worried about me and my siblings. And my sister was a county commissioner and was starting this Rural Action Caucus with the National Association of Counties, and had a big meeting in Duluth and brought in the founder of RUPRI, the Rural Policy Research Institute. He was the keynote speaker, Chuck Flaherty. And after his speech, I was visiting with him, and he said, oh, your sister Colleen tells me that you're trying to figure out what you're going to do for your next job. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know what I'm going to do. And he's like, what would you think about coming out to Washington, D.C., and starting an office for us? So RUPRI is a Heartland-based, land grant research institute, national research institute, that would always be based in the Heartland. But he wanted more presence in the D.C. area, D.C. office. And he made me an amazing offer to be able to live in Minnesota and commute and do the work. So I flew back and forth, and so I worked in Washington. Unlike most people who go to Washington at a young age in their early 20s, here I was in my late 30s, commuting back and forth to Washington. And that was incredible because at that time, that was the late 90s, I got to do some of the most amazing work. I worked with two female congresswomen, a Republican and a Democrat, to rebuild the Rural Caucus in the House of Representatives. So I also worked with a group of NGOs, non-government organizations in Washington, D.C., to build a national network to support the Rural Caucus, and to have this disparate group of rural stakeholders who fight over this little piece of pie, have them come together to figure out what are 2 or 3 things that the caucus could do to help rural America and that we could support, all of us could support. So that was absolutely incredible work. And that was back in the day in D.C. when people worked across party lines for their districts and for their people and their issues. And so I feel very fortunate to have been able to do that work. And I also did a lot of work with the cool thing about RUPRI, the Rural Policy Research Institute, is we were made up of panels that would really look at what is the rural differential of policy impacting rural America. So it would be researchers, policymakers, and practitioners who would come together. We'd bring panels together to look at a healthcare initiative and say, well, this is how this would impact rural Americans. This would be helpful. This would not be helpful. And they would present those findings on the Hill in briefings in D.C. And we also worked across the country, working with decision makers at all levels to figure out what is the best way to serve rural America. What's the best policy? So that was incredible work, and it was fun to be in D.C. and to be in the middle of the action and to still be there when it was a very definitely partisan votes, but people still really worked together, played softball together, staff hung out together. It just wasn't as divisive as it is today. Mm-hmm. So I feel very fortunate to have been in Washington when that was still the environment.
Yeah, I was thinking about that because, of course, we know that right now things are very divisive. And to me, this is my first time experiencing it as an adult, really, or an adult at an age where I can really understand things a bit more. And so my curiosity is this just the way it always was and I never understood that? Or are things more divisive than they once were? Does it maybe seem a bit more difficult to work in a nonpartisan space when things are so divided?
Yeah, I think, no, it definitely wasn't always this way. And it wasn't this way at the legislature. It wasn't this way in Congress. And at a local level. I mean, I've served in a local elected office. I mean, you always hang, as I always say, you hang your political hat at the door and you go in and do the work. That is not the case now. It's way too divisive. And that's one of the main reasons we started 100 Rural Women.
Right.
Was because trying to figure out how we can better work together and support each other and what that looks like. But no, it was very different. And staff hung out together. That doesn't happen today. Briefings on the Hill, D.C., nonpartisan institutes, people who do work that is nonpartisan, try to hold briefings on the Hill just about what the impacts of legislation are. Staff are nervous to come because people might think that organization leans a different way or whatever. So, yeah, it's really unfortunate. And you really lose the relationship building because it's think of the legislature and think of Congress. It's not as much about your politics as it is about your district and the people that you represent. So if you aren't meeting with and connecting with people who have some similar constituent needs that you do, you're missing out because that's where the collaboration comes together. And that's where I think there's a huge gaping hole in our political system today, and that's where I think women just tend to be so much more collaborative. And I don't want to generalize because I know that there are outliers, but women just have more of a track record of being more collaborative, get the work done, get home, get things done. That's sort of the way women operate. So that's always been my experience. And I think that goes, as well with public service as it does into, the service I had in the private sector. I just think women have a different approach when it comes to career, credit taking, empowering others, getting the work done. So I do think that's a big gap, a big leadership gap for us in this country.
And how long were you in Washington, D.C. for?
I was in Washington for 4 years, and one of the main reasons I left was that sister I talked about earlier, who was a county commissioner, decided she was going to take a run at Congress, and she had worked for Tim Penny, the former congressman, when he was in office, and she did not run after he left, but after the first term of his opponent the person who took his job won, she decided it was important for her to run. So I knew I needed to be home to help her and be home more. And this is sort of my story, my drive into the public sector that I hadn't anticipated, or private sector that I hadn't anticipated. I was born in Worthington, but I grew up in Mankato, and we were at an event in Mankato for her campaign, and cut through my old high school, which was a all-girls school, and we had boarders. It was an international boarding school, and we had cut through the dorms, and I saw this name that I was familiar with, Coughlin. So it was a friend of mine that I had been friends with as a teenager, and my sister's like, "Oh yeah, Bob has a publishing company, and they do children's books," and so I was like, "Oh," so I left a business card and said, "Hey, I might be home more. I haven't seen you for years. We should get together." So long story short, he and I did end up getting together for lunch. And he talked to me about, well, you should come work with me. We could do business development together. You could come home. You could be here. Colleen's running. And so we met, went well. For a lot of people, I have a big 9/11 story, and my 9/11 story is I was supposed to be flying at a national airport in Washington the day of 9/11, the attack happened, and I did not. I was at home because I was going to meet with the president of his company about going to work there. So that's my 9/11 story.
Wow.
That's my DC story. My daughter was like nervous about me ever flying into Washington again after that. So long and short of it is, my sister ended up not running for office because after 9/11, everything just sort of collapsed, and she was running against a very well-funded incumbent, and didn't realize she could not win, and she did not run, and I ended up going to work to do business development with Coughlin companies, and there were 5 businesses he wanted to start. He's quite an entrepreneur. 1 was a publishing company. The other 5 were disparate companies of leadership development, precious gems, just a variety of different initiatives. And he decided that after 9/11, everyone was pulling back, and he was going to invest, and he wanted to start a picture book company. So I'm like, great, I'll work on those other 5 ideas, and you go with your picture book company. And he's like, no, I want you to do it. Do you have the right profile? I'm very entrepreneurial, but I have a big social component, so I have to have mission in my work. And literacy is a huge mission. And he wanted me to lead this picture book company because everybody told him he couldn't do it. So he felt he needed someone from outside the industry to figure it out, and gave me a lot of money. Not enough, I learned, but enough to figure it out. And I was able to build a startup as part of a big company, but on my own. And we hit the market right. Had a great product. Again, I didn't know how I was going to do illustration and illustrators because I did not have enough money, but did a partnership with MCAD, the Minneapolis College of Art and Design, worked with students because I just knew that we could get some very unique art if I had a strong art director, and they could get published. So it really served both ways. So you always see through my work, there's always been that student component is a big piece for me.
Yeah.
So that's how I ended up in publishing. Amazing. Got to build an international company. Got to travel the world and buy and sell rights and work with incredibly smart people, creative people. Librarians were our first customers. So all these big, First Amendment people. It was amazing. It was amazing work. We were super successful. Company exploded. And then the company got very corporate and very hierarchical. So that takes me into my nonprofit sector work after that, because it was getting tough. My company was growing big time. A lot of structure came in, a lot of hierarchy, a lot of corporate. I was the only woman president. And it got to be a sort of uphill battle, and bottom line took over, and mission started to creep away. So I knew it was time for a change and for me to go. So,
and I mean, it's so inspiring, and I know we say this over and over again about so many women's stories, but really, this is such an important piece of why I've wanted other people to get to know some of your pathway too, because it's so encouraging to me, as well as I'm sure so many other people, young and even 20 years into their career, that you can change and you can start something else. I think when I first got out of college, I thought, I knew I could dip my toes in different things, but you think, oh, maybe I need to, start at the bottom now. And so I have to know kind of, in order to get hired in somewhere, I might need experience in that someday. And so it felt a little bit overwhelming, but just knowing that, you can change your mind later on, and then you can work in legislation, and then you can work in children's publishing. 10 years later, and it's okay. Like, you can do all of that, and then you can leave all of that and start a nonprofit for women in rural areas of Minnesota, and all of that is possible, and things will work out the way that they need to. And that is so inspiring for me, and has helped me learn a lot more about what I might want to do. And a big part of you as a person and your personal mission is connecting people and opening doors for people and helping them understand and just see different opportunities that there could be. And that is a big part of what I know the mission of 100 Rural Women is. But I would love for you to be able to talk about why you started 100 Rural Women and why the focus on rural and nonpartisan and women in particular.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, we all have transferable skills, and you don't really realize how transferable those skills are. And sometimes moving to a different industry or different sector, it's a new vocabulary. You have different acronyms you have to learn. But just me going from, to the policy side and that whole political infrastructure into publishing, for example, it's every sector has politics. And so it's like those skills of how to navigate and how to work with people and how to bring people together and how to build things, they're all transferable. And when I left publishing, like, dumbest financial decision I ever made in my life, best personal decision I ever made in my life, and my first dive into nonprofits. I did build a nonprofit around renewable energy, and that was working with rural entrepreneurs who were building these technologies in these companies, and I think that is a really important piece of it too, that rural people are super entrepreneurial because they have to be. And it can be geography, it can be a lot of different isolation and circumstances. And you would not believe how many people in this state who live in rural areas run huge international enterprises because you have to leverage resources from so many places. So I love that entrepreneurial spirit. I love the rural spirit. The cool thing about rural is you have to figure out how to work together. There aren't that many of you. So it's not just like figuring out how to do your business and do those things. How do you educate your kids? How do you make sure that you have good governance? All those pieces. So that's something that's always been really interesting to me. But the big gap for me, and this goes all the way back to me being a little kid, is, well, so wait a minute here. So the women are doing the work, and the women are leading every day, but they aren't in decision-making leadership roles. So that's always bugged me since I was a little kid, because I'm like, well, wait a minute, but why aren't the women in elected office? Why aren't the women running these organizations? How does that work? And we talk about women's leadership. Women lead every day. But they aren't necessarily in the official decision-making roles. So I saw that as a gap from the time that I was a little kid, and I'm really fortunate that I grew up in a family with super strong, engaged women, and a dad that told me I could do anything. So I was very lucky in that respect. But I always, even going back to high school, the nuns, I'd be like, I don't get it. So father's got a brand new Chevy, and he's driving around, got his golf clubs in there, and then 25 nuns are sharing this old beater station wagon. Okay, what's up with this story? So I've always had that equity piece. And in the legislature, why aren't there more women serving, particularly from rural? There are more women serving in elected office right now, but they aren't from rural areas. They aren't from rural areas. So that's always been something that's always been around my, in my atmosphere and around me, that's always bothered me, that we didn't have more women in official decision-making roles across sector, not just in elected office, but across sector. So that's really 100 Rural Women really came together it's always been in the back of my head, but probably that 2016 election was really difficult for me because the way women were being discussed and dismissed, and the way rural America was being painted with this broad brush, which definitely is true in a lot of areas, but not the rural America, not the rural people I know. So that's really when 100 Rural Women started, was after that 2016 election. I just thought, who's going to want to live in rural America if we don't really think about what kind of environment and community we have? And my thought was the only way rural America is going to grow and change and be more open and collaborative is if we have more women in formal leadership roles. And so that's really how, it was a simple idea. It was not a brainchild idea. It was just like, we got to figure out how we can better support each other as women, and particularly rural women. So I brought together a group of 20 women. We had moved to northern Minnesota, so I live just north of Grand Rapids, about 45 minutes in a township, Marcel. And I brought 20 women from around the state together and just said, hey, I want to start this organization, and I want to figure out how we can better support each other as rural women. And I had done my market research to see if anyone was doing this work, because I sure didn't want to do it. If somebody else was doing it, I don't want to replicate. But I felt really, really strong that it needed to be nonpartisan and it needed to be non-issue oriented, which is really difficult to do in these days. And I got a lot of pushback at that meeting of how are you going to build a nonpartisan organization at this divisive time? And it's like, because that's where the work needs to happen. And that's what we need to do. So that's how 100 Rural Women came together. And it's been incredible. But I'm somebody that, yeah, wouldn't it be great if everybody thought like me? That'd be wonderful. But
I think that's a little bit of everybody.
Yeah, but I think it is, you need to be surrounded by people with different ideas and different perspectives, because that's the only way you grow and learn. And my goal with 100 Rural Women is not to change minds, but to better inform people. So maybe they'd make more enlightened decisions and more better informed decisions. So that's really the piece. And to figure out, women need to better support each other. We need to figure out how women support women. Mm-hmm. And what are those connections? What are those opportunities? What are those networks? And how do we get women to be, when you look at data and research, it's like takes 7 to 9 times to get a woman to even consider running for office. And just offhand research shows that men are just like, well, yeah, I could do that. Women feel like they need to know everything and have every issue covered before they can step forward. And we need to have women feel more comfortable that, no, you bring things to the table and you bring them the way you are right now. And you can learn the systems, you can learn the process. You don't need to know everything before you step out. So it's really a leadership confidence piece that's important. And I ran for school board. Oh, my God. The hardest job, well, I don't know if it's the hardest, one of the hardest jobs I've had. And I wasn't a curriculum expert. I wasn't a finance expert. I was a parent that was like, what the heck is going on in this community? We're a wealthy community and we aren't going to support arts and music. What's going on here? That's really how I came into that public service. And that was it's a difficult. Those are difficult roles. People should thank their school board members anytime they see them, because that is one of the most difficult roles I've ever had. But what's more important than educating our children? I mean, my gosh. So I think that's a big piece that women will run for school board. We have more women on school board, but boy, we do not have women on county boards, and we don't have enough women in the legislature from outside the 7-county metro area. So that's on the elected side. That's just a big interest of mine.
Yeah, of course. And that led into some of the other projects that you ended up doing with 100 Rural Women. And it wasn't just focused on getting people into elected office either. It was positions of leadership in all different areas, whether that's in your work or your business or your hobbies or your community. It was just a matter of wanting to build that confidence and that community, and helping people share each other's stories so that they can see that if someone else did it, maybe they can do it too, and they can have some guidance in doing that as well. So what's really unique about this organization is that it ended up being 100% remote just because of the nature of when it started, and it wasn't originally supposed to be. So I know that was kind of a difficult navigation for you. I joined after it had already been established as, okay, this is going to be remote now. But after that initial meeting, what did you do to take that and be like, okay, now we're going to start? How did you build this organization and keep it running?
Yeah, absolutely. So I had done market research before we met with folks, just to see where the gaps were and see if anybody else was doing the work, or if there's somebody we could collaborate with. And as I said, I wanted it nonpartisan, non-issue oriented, and really focused on rural women. And so I'm a big believer in research. I think that you need to figure out data and research, and figure out if you're going to build something, you need to serve the people that are going to be involved in it. So our first thought with 100 Rural Women was, and this has a marketing spin to it, but it was really important to me. We're going to do 100 meetings in 100 days and have 100 ideas. Because I thought, yeah, sure, I think I know what rural women need. I don't know. I'm just one person. So I thought it was really important to find out from people, how could we add value as an organization? So our 100 meetings, as you mentioned, changed because COVID hit, and we ended up doing them virtually. We had over 2,000 women participate. We had, I think there were over 3,000 unique ideas that were submitted. And we came out with 6 themes of findings of what could help women better connect, overcome challenges, see opportunities. And we had one thread that went through all those, which was mentorship. So that was a huge piece. And when you look at all of our program at 100 Rural Women, it really came out of that initial research. But one of the pieces of research that came out was women, as you mentioned, want to learn from other women's leadership journeys. And so a lot of our program reflects that. And that's this podcast. I'm hoping we'll do that also. So women can hear other women's stories and say, oh, that's how you navigated that, or that's how that happened. Well, I could do that. So really people being able to envision themselves doing some different things, or navigating a issue, or seeing a strategy that might work for them. And then better connecting is really, how do we connect and support each other better as women, and what does that look like? And so we have our programming does that. We connect women that's the beauty of my work. Every week I get to meet incredible women and then figure out, how do I connect them? Gosh, if I had unlimited funds, we could do so many amazing things, just connecting women. So that really is the core of our work, is how do we better connect women, how do we better support each other as women, and how do we get women serving in more formal leadership roles across sectors. And oh my God, I want to think about corporate boards. My God, there's just such a huge gap of women serving. So as I said, I think a lot of people say, well, women are leading communities all the time, and they do. It's just not formal leadership. So it's making budget decisions, making policy decisions, and showing women that they have what it takes. They have what it takes today to be able to do this work. And so it's really empowering and building leadership confidence with women. So it's incredible work. The funding, oh my God, that has just been brutal, as it is for most nonprofits. And we just were, we started at a tough time with COVID. A lot of things have happened, but we've been able to find people who believed in our work that gave us some funding to be able to do the work. And the way we really built this organization is, as we say, our secret sauce, I always say that, is young people like you, Alexa. And if we wouldn't have had interns and grad students, we would not be an organization today. And yes, do we mentor students and give them an opportunity? Yes, but do we learn from students? Absolutely. What I love about students is students will they'll push me we got to address this issue. We need to figure out, and then it's sort of like, okay, together, how do we figure out, how do we address this issue how do we lift this up? How do we better inform and engage rural women? So it's been an incredible experience to figure out how to do that. So I love that piece of it.
I do too, and I've had the opportunity to be able to be here through multiple waves of internships. I wasn't in the first cohort of interns, but I was in the second, and that was back in, 2020, I think. Yeah. So now we're in 2025, and I can't believe that it's been 5 years since our first initial meeting, and, obviously have come in and out for specific projects, but I even was able to work as our intern coordinator and manager for a semester, and that was really special too, because seeing so many of them come in and out and still, keeping up with them on LinkedIn after, I know that this internship was not a waste for anybody, and it was impactful in one way or another, and it's just so special to see. And I think a lot of people maybe think of an internship as something to check off so that they can get experience or get their foot in the door with something, but when you do an internship with 100 Rural Women, it really is because you care about people and women and empowerment, and I think that's so special, but also the opportunities that you get because it is a startup, because it is a bit smaller. Like, I've been able to do things that I know I never would have been able to do otherwise somewhere else. So as far as like leadership goes or trying different things, I mean, when I say I've worked in all the different projects here, like really I have dipped my toes in so many different areas, and that's such a blessing to me because I was able to figure it out a bit quicker about, okay, I actually think I don't like working in this, or I think I do like working in this. And so as much as this organization is really fueled by interns are fueled by this organization too, and I think that's something that's been really special about it.
Yeah, and I think when we first started 100 Rural Women, we really looked at mentorship as a circular leadership program, because it is. It's like us learning from young people learning from older women, sharing resources. That really is the crux of it, and that can happen generationally. It can just happen across women working with women. But I think that's an important piece. And I think about our programming. We really morphed into. Everything's based in some kind of mentorship or leadership. So learning from each other. And as I said, we're not, we're 501, so we stay away from, politics and issues and partisanship. And the way we lift up issues is we lift up what women are doing. And that can be, young women, older women, across race, culture, professions, socioeconomic status. And it's really having women tell their stories and share what's worked, what hasn't worked, where they're headed from here. And with our programming that came out of our original research, we have Morning Connections, which is an open networking, 30 minutes a week, which I was like, well, let's see how this goes. Totally oversubscribed. It's wonderful. We make more connections out of that, but we try to keep that a really safe space. We don't share information from that. We don't capture information from that. Definitely get program ideas from folks who want to participate. But I love that piece of it. It's just sort of a place where women can come together and talk and connect, and so many connections come out of that. And you had mentioned spotlight profiles, and we really wanted to lift up women's leadership journeys, and that's where this podcast comes in, because it's great to do these, and they're out on our website, but we're trying to figure out how do we make our program more accessible. So as we had to move from this vision of being a organization that delivered programming in person to moving virtual, now we're in that virtual space. How do we make our programming more accessible? Before we had people's attention during COVID. Now women again are pulled many different ways. How do we bring our programming to more women and make it easily accessible? So that's the cool thing about this podcast that I'm really excited about, as well as the opportunity to get to interview all these amazing women. So I just feel like we have quite an opportunity to even connect more women.
Yeah.
And that's what I love about the work.
Yeah. And I think a dream for the organization has been, to not only reach rural Minnesota, but other states, other countries. We have done some collaboration with a women's organization in rural Thailand, which was really, really a cool opportunity to get to have. And even though we love to focus on our Minnesota women, I think a podcast is just such a great way to reach people, whether it's inspiring leadership in their own lives or just sharing people's stories, because they do deserve to have that spotlight. And that was the whole idea what was at the center of a lot of our programming. And I say that in past tense just because a lot of that phased out a bit and will be shifting towards the podcast. So in that sense, I mean, spotlight profiles, ask a leading woman. Some of our webinars will be more like this type of style. And so it's been great to have those programming. I'm excited to see this shift. And I also would like to let people know that if you would like to get involved in the organization, there are still ways. So first of all would be listening to this podcast, subscribing, leaving a review, interacting, and following on socials, but also showing up for those meetings like Morning Connections. The book group is still run, and some of those public meetings like webinars and such that do still happen, just not quite as frequently because of the shift in programming.
Yeah, and I think the one thing about our organization is we always want to meet the needs of the participants and hear what works for people. And so anything we can do to make our programming more accessible and to connect more women. We grew with the model of we're going to build models in Minnesota, go regional, national, global. We've touched on some of those pieces and made some amazing connections and been able to, as Alexa said, lift up stories and experiences of women all over the world. And this podcast is, we want to interview 100 rural women. That's what we're going to start with. Rural means many things. Rural can mean growing up in rural. It can mean in rural. It can mean interest in rural. It can be a very broad interpretation. So we're hoping with this first 100 women that we interview to bring you a variety of different women doing like amazing things and women that support women. So that's really what it's about.
Yeah. And even though I will be stepping out for the rest of the episodes, I'm so happy to be able to listen and watch them. And thank you everybody for tuning into this episode of the 100 Rural Women podcast. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Teresa as much as I did. She's reluctant, doesn't love the spotlight herself, but I'm so glad that you all get to meet the host and the woman behind it all first, because truly I think your story is a really impactful one. And even though I know you love to give the spotlight to everybody else, I think it's important to share yours too, and for everyone to get to meet who you are too.
Yeah, and I would just throw one main thing in at the end, that I'm super fortunate to have an amazing daughter, and I just think I look at you, Alexa, and look at the young women that I've gotten to work with, and that's what gives me hope for the future, is young women, and we need to figure out how we can better support young women, and that's another big piece of what I've loved about 100 Rural Women, is having, we have a good mix of women, but really having young women's voices at the table and really recognizing that we need to figure out how to better support young women. That's a huge piece of us moving forward. So thank you for everything you've done. And Alexa always tries to, step forward to her next career, her next geography, all those pieces, but I'm always pulling her back into 100 Rural Women, so don't be surprised if you see her again.
Yeah, you'll see me again.
I love it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, turn on automatic downloads, and follow us on socials at 100 Rural Women so you can join us each week on Wednesdays, our release day. To donate or find out how you can get more involved, follow the links in the description. And if you'd like to support our mission and keep this podcast going, share with friends and leave a rating and review. It only takes a few seconds, and it really helps us reach more people and inspire more leadership. Thank you, and we'll see you next week.